Hello, and welcome to the viewers to the interview that is about to start. That has been fostered by the IGBA. The IGBA is the International Generics and Biosimilars Association in the framework of the third Global Biosimilars Week. Let me just very quickly introduce myself. My name is Fernando de Mora. I am professor of pharmacology at a fairly big Spanish university, public university called Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona. And I have been asked by the IGBA precisely to handle an interview with our guest, Dr. María José Cuadrado. Hello, María José, and welcome.
Hi. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just very quickly, María José, let me quickly introduce you just by saying that you're a senior consultant rheumatologist and chief of the rheumatology service at the Clínica Universidad de Navarra, which is a fairly big Spanish hospital, very renowned hospital. And incidentally, and I think that is very important for the purpose of our interview, you have had a long-lasting experience in clinical practice in the UK. So I think this is extremely relevant for the purpose of the subject that we're going to approach today, which is your experience with biosimilars. What do you think? What is your opinion about the benefits that biosimilars may have brought into the national healthcare systems? So if that is okay, without further ado, let me start precisely with that very first question, María José. Let me start by asking you if you actually use biosimilars in your daily practice, and if so, how have they entered the rheumatology department? Maybe not only in Spain, but also you can tell us about your experience in the UK. That would be very interesting if you could elaborate on that, please.
Okay, yeah, my first contact with biosimilar was in UK. I have to admit that at the beginning, when we hear about biosimilar, when I say we, I refer to all consultant rheumatologists in the department. I was at Guy's and St. Thomas's Trust Foundation, and we were a big department. When we hear about biosimilar, we were quite reluctant to the new drugs. We didn't know anything, just the name biosimilar. So this is similar to the other. We were at the very beginning very reluctant, but at the same time, the possibility of saving money in our budget, if you know a little bit the NHS in UK, you have a fixed budget for a unit, and you had to attach to this budget. You cannot go over that and not have money to finish the year, because it has big impact in other things. So we have a fixed budget, and we said, if we can save in medication, it's easier for us to get other things. In UK, there is a gain sharing system. So if we were able to save money in our budget on drugs, part of this money we will reverse to our department, and we need other things. So we invited some experts, external experts on biosimilar, pharmacologists as yourself, also biologists, and they explained to us all the process of manufacturing and all the controls that a biosimilar has to pass before being approved. So this was quite convinced and said probably the similarity, the safety, the efficacy is going to be the same. So at the very beginning, we just switched, we did not switch, but we started all new patients that needed biosimilar, that needed biological drug on biosimilar, not on the originator, but in the biosimilar. And after 2-3 months, we didn't have any side effects, any problem. We decided to switch all our patients on biological to the corresponding biosimilar. And this allowed, we built up a process, and this allowed us to save money that was very, very useful for our department. Later on, when I came to Spain, it was 2018, I am working in a private hospital, and most of insurance companies do not cover the cost of biological drugs. This is amazing because they cover oncologic biological drugs, but not rheumatology. So the possibility of offer a patient a biosimilar that is much cheaper was very, very easy. So I did not have to do anything apart of talk with the chief of pharmacology department and approve in our hospital all these biosimilars.
So that's interesting. So as you emphasized, essentially, the experts reassured you about the fact that biosimilar and the originator are essentially the same product. And I think that's an important. So by reassuring or by explaining the biosimilar or the science of biosimilarity, you felt reassured. You started with new patients. And then when you actually practiced or you prescribed biosimilars, then you saw that indeed the response was the same as expected, but you reasonably had to sense it yourself as expected. Then you started switching patients, right? So that I think that's a very interesting process. Reassurance by understanding, and then switching by also having experience with those products and seeing that they in fact behave similarly. Now, you mentioned, that's very interesting, the idea that the resources that were the remnants or the remainings as a result of using biosimilar were used within the hospital. Can I ask you in what specific areas, what were the needs that were covered with those resources?
Oh, yeah. First of all, we were able to use other new drug, more expensive, that we were a little bit restricted by the budget. And some money we used to contract a data manager that we needed for clinical trials. I think we also bought some new computers. So it was the thing, first of all, the drug. If we have expensive drug that we had to ask for million of permission because it was completely out of our budget, this saving allowed us to use this more expensive drug. And in the other side, some needs that we have in the department.
Okay, so you mentioned about switching, and sometimes the risk perception or the perception of the risk of switching from the originator to the biosimilar is certainly not well calibrated. So in spite of the fact that I think there are two things that support that switching is a very, very safe practice, which is the science of biosimilarity. And that is also the fact that there's a lot of experience now, vast experience in switching, not only in rheumatology, but also in other specialties, medical specialties, right? So are you now confident with switching your patients? You mentioned that in your case in Spain, you use substantially more biosimilars than originators, but in general, would you feel very confident that switching any patient, even a stable patient, is a very safe practice and you don't incur into any specific risk when compared with non-switching? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I completely do. I don't have any doubt now. There has been, as you said, a huge experience on switching. We had the register from Norway, and they switched all the patients. And my own experience in the UK, as I told you before, first it was new patient, but secondly it was a patient that were already, and patients that were stable in some originator. What we did, it was write a letter that it was very thought, explaining in a lay language for patient what is the concept of the biosimilar, explaining also that between originator, they are different between a budget and another budget. This drug, because they are biologic and they are not chemistry, we can say they are not identical from one budget to the other in the same medication. They are different, but they are a small difference that doesn't have any impact in efficacy or safety. And once that you understand that it was explained by this external expert to all us, maybe there are a small side effect, maybe a patient said, I feel I am a little bit worse, but this happened also with originator. Unfortunately, our disease, a chronic disease, and most of our inflammatory and autoimmune disease, they have flare. So maybe it's not the switch, it's just that you are having a flare now, as you have been in the originator. So you have to be, as you said, comfortable, because you know that the manufacturing process, the approval, everything is a guarantee for the safety and efficacy of this drug, because the difference with the originator are not meaningful difference, are not bigger than the difference between one batch and another from the same originator.
Yeah, thank you, because I think that's very important to point out. I mean, the originator has differences because of the biological source. So from batch to batch, you can actually analytically observe the differences that you would never pick up clinically. So this is exactly the same. I mean, the biosimilar may have very light differences that do not really have any clinical impact. So I think that is interesting that you have come through time to realize that going from an originator biosimilar is essentially the same as keeping up with the originator's treatment. Now, how do you foreview the actions that are undertaken by healthcare administrations to actually promote or foster the switching? Is this something that, do you know about this in the Spanish public healthcare system? There are actions to intended to have patients being switched. As for instance, let me just make a quick comment here. The British Gastroenterology Society, quite a few years ago already, recommended patients in gastroenterology patients to be switched from the originator to the biosimilar of a product bearing infliximab. So very early on, we've had that kind of thing. So how should this be fostered to get the most out of biosimilars value?
I notice a big difference in how patients in general population feels the National Health Service, the public National Health Service in UK and in Spain. And I assume it's the same in other countries. Something that I always tell about the national health system and the society, the general population, is that they are very proud of their national health system. And they see the national health system as something of themselves. They are part of this national health system. And there's the responsibility to make it a sustainable system is our responsibility, not only as a patient, but as general population. I will tell you something very short, but I remember a patient of anticoagulation, and they have to go to the national health system to control the level of anticoagulation. Some machines appear that you can do this at home. And some of them, even they have to pay initially for the machine, said, I prefer to do it at home. It's easier for me, but it's also a saving for the national health system. So they has in the DNA that the national health system, you can remember the Olympics game, the ceremony, they show a sketch about the national health system because it's one of the things they are very proud of. Okay. I didn't notice this in Spain. Before going to UK, I was working like 16 years in Spain, and I'm sorry, it's not the critic, but I think it's culture. We feel that we have the right to everything, and our contribution is not so important as general population and sometimes as patient. So when we wrote the letter in UK to all our patients on biological, we said that the advantage of biosimilar, and the main one, was economic. And we wrote to more than 200 patients, and only we established a small clinic with the pharmacist and a nurse for everyone that wanted to ask something, to ask an appointment in this clinic. After receiving the letter, you receive the letter, you have some doubt, you call and have an appointment in this clinic, and the pharmacology and the nurse, we will explain you all your doubts. Out of more than 200 patients, only 5 patients asked an appointment to this clinic. In Spain, first of all, doctor has been more reluctant to switch to biosimilar, and also general population. I think that is something very common to think if something is cheaper, it's worse. And if you don't know, we said, how are going to be cheaper? It has to be worse, because one is very expensive, the other one is cheap. Yeah, but you have to know why you are saving so much money. They didn't have to do clinical trial that is the most expensive on a part of the molecular research, the most expensive in the process, because the originator demonstrated that is safe and efficacious. So you do not have to do clinical trials. You have to demonstrate that is similar enough not to have minimum any big difference. So I noticed this difference between culture. In Spain, the government was very pro-biosimilar because of the saving, but they found some resistance in doctors and in patients. So in some regional government, they impose, if you are going to put a biological drug, at least 30–40% has to be biosimilar. But we didn't impose, that would be logic. You are not allowed to put originator because we do not have money. Maybe this is very drastic, but when you are convinced that the things work the same, it doesn't make any sense to use the most expensive things. You have to have a very solid reason to use a more expensive drug when you said you have the same cheaper.
Yeah, and I guess that made it easier for you to communicate to the patient the transition between the originator and the biosimilar in the UK. And that's probably why actions need to be taken. I mean, to some extent, we may understand that there are cultural differences that make it difficult sometimes to have the patients understand. And I would say, I don't know if you agree with me, and I would say that it's not only a matter of money. I mean, when we say you save, it looks like, again, you're saving because as you said, it has something in it. Well, all that money, all those resources have an impact on the patient, I would say. And I would like to ask you, do you think that all this experience at biosimilars, this vast amount of patients having been treated, the fact that the overall biologic treatment cost has gone down, may have even an impact on the therapeutic approach? I mean, do you think that, for instance, not only more patients do have access to biosimilars, but also they may have an earlier access to biosimilars? Do you have this kind of change in the therapeutic paradigm?
Definitely. I am sure. I have been in several conferences or meetings about biosimilar. And in the discussion, in the debate, I remember perfectly now some doctors from some countries that is not necessary to name, but they said, look, we do not have money for biologic. So we are allowed, we can afford to treat only 15%, I'm remembering now the country, 15% of the patient who needs biologic. Not the patient that are, no. I am seeing rheumatoid arthritis or ulcerative colitis, and I know that this patient needs biosimilar, but I already spent my budget. So I had to continue with this patient with conventional treatment, knowing that the disease is going to progress. So for this type of countries, it's essential, because now with biosimilar, they can afford to treat, if not 100%, but probably 85, 90% of the patient who needs a biologic, because of the appearance of biosimilar and also the lower price of the originator, that they have to lower the price to be able to compete with biosimilar. So I think this has been a big, big benefit for the whole public system or private health system. I think in countries richer, we can say, or with more resources, maybe we are using biologic earlier because we know better the pathogenesis and the cause of the disease, and we know now that as early as better, because we are going to avoid the chronic damage that the progression of the disease causes. So we are very aware of that, knowing more the pathophysiology or pathogenetic mechanism of the disease and knowing more the cause of the disease. So I think everyone now is using biologic earlier than 10, 15 years ago. And in some countries, that would be not possible at all without the biosimilar.
Yes, well, I fully agree with the fact that some countries that have less resources really have been very much benefited. But I think also Western Europe, you see the example of Norway, for instance. Norway has done this massive change at some point for patients receiving infliximab, and even there was an increase of the treatment days as well in Norway. So I think it really benefits any patient in any country. And now, what do you think should be done? I mean, do you think a gain sharing agreement would be a good thing to do in Spain? That is, just for people to understand, have what you mentioned earlier, have the medical service benefit by receiving more resources because of the use of biosimilars. Is this something that you think could be? There's a lot of debate in Spain over that. Do you think this would work here? Is this something that could help prescribers be more prone to use biosimilars, to prescribe biosimilars?
I'm pretty sure, but I very much doubt that this is possible in the Spanish health system. There is no incentive for anything in the public system. So I am sure at least it was very, very helpful for us in London, because you imagine what happened in a clinical setting. You see your patient is, for instance, with infliximab that you mentioned before, and the patient is pretty stable. And I have patients in the waiting area waiting. And now, apart of seeing the patient, I had to say, look, I'm going to change your medication, that you are pretty stable. I'm going to change to similar, it's the same medication, but the advantage is that it's a little bit cheaper. And you have to take 10 minutes of your time to explaining the patient agree, and all these things. Why for? I have my waiting area with patient. This patient is stable in this medication, and I have to be doing all this. Why? What for? No, maybe next time, just the following patient. And this is the real life in the clinical setting. So if I think that if I do this, just 10 minutes of explanation, when I am convinced of one thing, the explanation follow very easily. If I know that doing so, I am going to have a specialist nurse that I really need, or we are going to have better computer because the system is extremely slow, whatever you do, it's worth it to spend these 10, 15 minutes. But otherwise, yourself has to be very aware of all of us are paying the public health system to do that. And even, in the daily life, in the real life, what you want is to attend your patient and finish your clinic. I don't know if you agree with that, or it's a very simplistic.
No, I mean, I know that's the reality of it. Obviously, I think there are other things. I mean, normally we say that this benefits other patients, but the same patient that is receiving the biosimilar, if at some point you mentioned earlier that that gives you access to innovator medicines, that same patient that is receiving a biosimilar, if at some point she or he needs an upgrade or a different treatment, he may have higher chances of getting it. Of getting that treatment becoming biosimilar. So it is a collective conscious or awareness, but it's also a benefit for a given for a given patient. And it is difficult, but I think that's why the healthcare administrators are working on it, because even at the same price, biosimilars in the healthcare systems do provide benefits. Like, for instance, don't you agree with me that, for instance, they will prevent from shortages? If you have the same treatment with two brand names, that prevents a shortage for a patient which is being treated chronically, don't you think?
Yeah, completely agree. But I think if there are some incentives to the doctor, nurses, the people involved in this process, that would be easier for biosimilar to penetrate. In the public health system in Spain, it's difficult. It's difficult to conjugate that or give some incentive for that. The old system is not easy to do that. But I am sure making patient conscious. Look, today you are with an anti-TNF, but maybe tomorrow you need an anti-CD depletion. That is very much expensive. If we don't save today on that, it's more difficult for us to get the other. I am doing very, very crude. But I am sure if we were able to do that, we didn't have any resistance in patients. But first of all, I don't know if it's a problem of education, because I think has been a huge amount of meeting education in the subject, in the matter of biosimilar. But I don't know if still some doctors are not completely convinced to be reluctant to this switching, to this change.
Okay, well, I think you've conveyed a lot of messages, and I'm happy that a person that is very experienced with the use of biosimilars like you is delivering such a positive message, because from what I understand, you only foreview a value into having biosimilars used in your hospital, in the healthcare system in general. But it's a process of trying to reassure patients, physicians, some of them, that we are talking essentially about the same product, simply with a different brand name. So I think that's the whole story of biosimilars, and everybody benefits from them, even innovation in healthcare. And that's it, Maria Jose. Thank you very much, Dr. Cuadrado. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll have other occasions to discuss those topics. Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for attending this interview.
It's been a pleasure also for me. Thank you.
Thank you.